I'm Cornell Clayton. I'm the director of the Foley Institute here at WSU, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today. This is not part of our series on the midterm elections, which will start again next week, where we have Francis Lee from Princeton University coming to talk about how close our elections have been for such a long period of time and how that changes the dynamics of campaigns and policymaking. But today we have with us, we're fortunate to have with us Miro Hajek, who's a professor of political science at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, where he has served as the head of the political science department and head of the policy analysis and public administration department. Miro currently serves as the president of Central European Political Science Association, and he is the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Comparative Politics. He has published dozens of scholarly journal articles, papers, and books in both the Slovene and in the English language. He's been a visiting scholar at universities around the world, including at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, South Dakota State University, and Cambridge University in the UK, and he's currently at Montana State University as a visiting scholar, where he's working on a large grant where he's studying conspiracy theories. So join me now in welcoming Miro Hajek.
Thank you, Cornell, for this rather too nice introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Miro Hajek. As Cornell told you, I'm coming from Slovenia, which is a very small country in Central and Eastern Europe. There are only 2 million of Slovenians in the whole country. So one of the smallest countries actually on the map. If you like geography, we are located here. Yeah. So the smallest of the Central and Eastern European countries. The topic of my lecture today, I was asked to speak a little bit about populism and the uncertain future, maybe uncertain future of democracy in Central and Eastern European political space. The structure of my lecture will be focused around 6 points, more or less. I will first make a short introduction to the problem, then I will present some main or most important measurements of democratic progression or decline. So we will see if those democracies in Central and Eastern Europe are really in danger or maybe they're not in danger. I will do general assessment of the Central and Eastern European region. I will talk more about populism and democratic decline in my own country of Slovenia. Then I will try to answer the question, why is Central and Eastern European Europe mecca for populism and populist leaders. I'm sure everybody, or almost everybody, heard of Viktor Orban before, the most popular guy in the region, and I will make short conclusion. Two introductory questions, two research questions are, does populism really represent a challenge to the traditional ways of how we do politics in the democracy, especially in the cases of political systems with fragile new democracies, democracies that have not yet been consolidated or are even backsliding, like Hungary, Poland, and some others in the region. And the second question, could populism also contribute towards the partial or total, maybe total reversal of democratic processes? So it's possible that some countries should go from democracy or full democracy back into the authoritarian regime, and as we will see, this is totally possible, unfortunately, as has already happened with Hungary. Short introduction, what is populism? We all like to use this little word, but it's not always very clear how to define it. Usually populism refers to the particular patterns of anti-establishment ideas, styles, political strategies, all employed with a very simple purpose: to win, to gain power, to gain political power, or if you're already on the top, to stay there, to maintain power. Theoretically, populism has neither negative or positive connotations, but in political practice, of course, it's different. It usually has some negative connotations, gotten bad reputation in the recent years, especially in my region, in Central and Eastern Europe, but also in some other European countries, also in the United States, I think, because it's often associated with authoritarianism and anti-immigrant ideas, which is particularly usually true of the right-wing populists, even if in Central and Eastern Europe also those ideas, those characteristics have more to do with ideology of the radical right than with the populism itself. And there is also, most recently, also some left-wing populism turning their heads up. Yeah, we can find populisms on both wings of political continuum, but usually right-wing populism is more frequent, more represented in the media, more known and also more problematic than the left-wing populism, which is not so strong usually. Increasing public rejection towards and distrust towards the public politics created an opening for these new political actors, so-called populists. Their point of access in politics were not dependent on traditional party cleavages, but rather on their personal ability to present themselves as some good, viable alternatives to the traditional parties. So we are different than those traditional parties. We are something new, something better. We populists are not traditional party leaders. They usually emphasize popular issues. They usually like to talk about higher political and especially ethical standards. So we are better than them. We are different. Vote for us because we are better. And their distinction from traditional party elites. So my presentation is going to examine and analyze a little bit the growing influence of party-based populism in Central and also Eastern European politics. I will talk about those guys. Maybe you have seen some of them before in the recent years. All those guys have won their elections many times over in many Central and Eastern European countries. Let me make some introductions. This is Kaczynski, the now Minister of Defense, but before the leader and the president of Poland, the Polish populist. I'm sure you know this guy, or have you seen this guy? This is Viktor Orban, now the president of the government in Hungary for many years already. Those two are the Czech Prime Minister, or former Czech Prime Minister, Babiš, and former Austrian Chancellor, or President of the government, Mr. Kurz, who resigned, had to resign. And this one, maybe you don't know him, this is one of the most trusted allies of Vladimir Putin in Europe, the Serbian President Vučić, and one of the representative of so-called right-wing populism in the Balkans. So those guys are all very much in power. Some of them not anymore, but their political parties, their populist parties are still very much there. And some are as strong as they ever have been, like our Viktor Orban. I will move on to the second part. We will devote some attention to the measurements of democracy, of democratic progression, of democratic consolidation. And let me start about the main questions: how people, voters, are actually satisfied with democracy in EU member states. You have listed I have listed all EU member states, there are many. And those are measurements from the last almost 20 years using the same survey that is done by European Commission in Brussels called Eurobarometer. And this Eurobarometer is always asking the simple question: how satisfied are you with the democracy? And the percentages here are the percentages of the people that have said, yes, I'm satisfied with democracy in my own country. And as you can see, the results are widely different in different European countries. If we for instance, look at the Hungary, we can see that the satisfaction with Hungarian democracy was quite low before Viktor Orban. What happened? Now they're happy, or more happy than before. Of course, maybe not with the democracy, maybe with something else, some populist measures that Viktor Orban introduced. For instance, Slovenia, my own country, you can see that the satisfaction went down and back up a little bit. So there are differences between different periods governed by different coalitions. In some countries, as you can see, it's more traditional, more stable European democracies like Austria or Germany. Differences are less obvious. It's more stable situation, and the satisfaction with democracy is more stable and also on the higher levels. In some countries, satisfaction goes up and down, like Greece. We all know the Greece crisis. They have started very high with 68. It has gone down to 11. So when there is a big crisis and people suffer, satisfaction with democracy, it's nowhere, basically. So what are takeaways from this? Let me wait a little bit and show you another measurement that is more science-based. Those are Freedom House Nations in Transit measurements. They do it every year, but I have selected a couple of years in the last 15-year period. General rule is the lowest the score, the best score. So if you have 100, you are perfect democracy. If you have 700, you are total failure, basically, total autocrat. And as you can see, there are not many countries considered to be consolidated democracies anymore in Central and Eastern Europe. We have started with 9 countries that were consolidated democracy in 2006, so before the global economic crisis. Now we are down to 6, only 6. So 2 of them, namely Hungary and Bulgaria, and also Poland in the last period, have gone somewhere. Where have they gone? They are now semi-consolidated democracy. Hungary even more. They are not even a democracy anymore. They are democracy in transition, which is a nice way to say that they are really hybrid regimes, so semi-authoritarian regime. So the drop of Hungary has gone from 200 to 4, over 4. So in just 14 years they have made total democratic reversal back to being authoritarian, or at least semi-authoritarian regime. And also some other scores, as you can see, have basically decreased. Also my own country, Slovenia, has seen some reversal of democratic processes. At the same time, some countries are doing quite well, but mostly those are Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which are more stable in Central and Eastern European space. And all the others are not really doing so well and are not very stable. Of course, you have listed here more countries that are semi-consolidated democracies, some that are not even reached democracies anymore. I could continue here. There are more countries below here, not really even hybrid regimes, being authoritarian regimes, Russia, Belarus, and so on. They are close to 7, so nothing really democratic there. And the third and the last measurement I will show you is the measurement from The Economist. We all know The Economist journal. They are doing their annual democracy index measurement, and they are basically classifying countries into four categories: in full democracies, broad democracies, hybrid regimes, and authoritarian regimes. I don't need to explain probably what each of those categories means. You want to be, of course, in the first one, into full democracies. What is the bad news for Central and Eastern Europe is that not even one country from Central and Eastern Europe is now regarded as the full democracy anymore. This is the more detailed measurement. Here you want to have score 800 or above. So 800 to 10, then you are a full democracy according to The Economist. As you can see from this region, nobody has the score that is basically close to 800 at the latest measurement here on the left side. Only Czech Republic started as a full democracy back in the 2000s, but even they somewhat declined a bit and are now considered to be a flawed democracy. So out of this, many countries, 30 plus in the Central and Eastern Europe, not even one, is full democracy today. All 21 full democracies are mostly from Western and Northern Europe. By the way, also United States now considered a full democracy according to The Economist. So welcome to the club. Welcome to the club of flawed democracies. And of course there are many, sadly many hybrid regimes, and sadly even more sad, almost 60 authoritarian regimes in the world. The absence of a single full democracy in Eastern and Central Europe is of course not a good news. It's striking, demands an explanation. Also, the region has seen considerable drop, a decrease of 0.4 points in overall score since 2006. So things are not progressing in the right direction. Things are decreasing in terms of democratic consolidation in Central and Eastern Europe. So we are not yet seeing signs of things getting better. Sadly, vice versa. The region continues to struggle. There are weaknesses in political democratic institutions, especially political culture is still not on the level of something that could be expected in the full democracy. In Central and Eastern Europe, in the last decade, we can observe an important shift from populism as non-ideological strategy towards distinctly more problematic state, when there are populist actors that revitalize and modernize anti-liberal legacies and revive the pre-modern nativist discourses. Along other impulses, the fiscal and economic crisis that hit the region very hard in the period 2008, 2009 and 2010 changed the situation dramatically. After this global economic crisis, things really turned to the worse. This juncture provided electoral earthquakes in many Central and Eastern European countries, and also the establishment of second post-transitive party systems in East Central Europe. Those politicians that have come to the surface after the global or during the global economic crisis are usually using the rhetoric of anti-European. Also, they are increasingly nationalist, using the nationalist rhetoric, nationalist narratives, or often criticizing the European Union, or often criticizing the accession to the European Union. So, European Union is something bad. This did not come as any positive to us. Catching up process towards the Western and Northern European countries is usually being criticized, is usually being presented as a failure. So European Union is no good for us, Hungarians, for us, Polish, and so on. The period was also accompanied by the politics of emotions, above all the fear from the renewal of peripheral positions of the region in the European architecture. But the next juncture was even more dramatic, and it's even more done even more damage. And this was the migration crisis that started in 2015 and beyond, even is there in some smaller extent even today. And this migration crisis further strengthened these feelings and brought a new wave of patriotism, a new wave of nationalism, new wave of xenophobia into the politics and society, not only into the politics but also in the societies of Central and Eastern Europe. The picture of the Central European nations as the most successful new democracies was recently remodified into the brand of the problematic children of Europe. So we are not talking about Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia or Slovenia as the new successful democracy success stories after entering the EU in 2004. Now we are talking about those problematic countries that should be dealt with, should be punished. We should do something with those countries because they are problematic. And not only contemporary regimes in Hungary and Poland, but also regional cooperative structures such as the V4 group, called Visegrad Group, or 3Cs initiative that unites the politics from the Central Europe with those with the Balkan states, are often now labeled as the populist and something that is not really positive. Also the culture wars over social norms, national values, historical symbols have since become found everywhere. They're waged both during the electoral campaigns by populist leaders like Kaczynski, like Orban, like Fico from Slovakia, like Strache from Austria, like Zeman, the president of the Czech Republic, and they went on after populist parties achieved huge electoral successes, over 50% of votes in Hungary and Poland. And if you have over 50% of the votes at the elections, you have total power, and you can basically do anything. A little bit about my own country, about Slovenia. Slovenia is a country that is facing continuous political crisis since the global economic crisis hit Slovenia in 2008, and politics had no answer how to battle the consequences of global economic crisis. We have faced many early parliamentary elections. What does this mean? The usual term of the government is 4 years, so the government did not survive for the 4 years. Something happened, the government fell apart, and we had to have early parliamentary elections in 2011, 2014, 2018, so three early parliamentary elections, and this resulted in the continuous political crisis. What we have seen in Slovenia is very much alike like in other Central and Eastern European countries. In 2014, for instance, there was a new populist political party that was established 41 days prior to the elections, and this party got the name after this guy. He was the professor of law at the University of Ljubljana, professor of law, advisor to the national parliament. Other than that, he was not a politician. But he established a party named after him, party of Miro Hajek, and surprisingly got 36% of the votes, just 6 weeks later, basically, at the election. What he did, he emphasized popular issues, so you will get higher wages, you will get higher pensions, everything will be okay. We will introduce higher political and ethical standards, so no more corruption, we will battle corruption. And of course, they emphasize their distinction from traditional party elites. Those party elites were corrupt. Do not vote for them, vote for us, because we are somebody with higher standards. We are good politicians. Basic. Also, in the same elections, we saw the new extreme left populist party, which is rare in Central and Eastern Europe, called the left, or in Slovenian language it would be Levica, also with many populist policies. Let's just abolish the army, we don't need the army. We should use this money for the healthcare and for the education, for instance. Being in the NATO country, this is a little difficult to do. Also, they fueled from nostalgia towards former socialist system. They got 15% like that in 6 weeks. So what we have seen in Slovenia are those new populist parties. We sometimes call them infant political parties, just popping up and winning huge amounts of votes on all three occasions in 2011, 14 and 18. I just presented the results of 2014. Yes?
If my memory is correct, Ljubljana is in Slovenia?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It is. So the solution to the structural, economic, and societal problems is often seen in destruction of traditional political cleavages, resulting in emergence of populist and non-partisan political leaders, populist on the national level, non-partisan on the local, on municipal level, and similar populist political parties, often referred as infant political parties, that just pop up. In one election they got a lot of votes, at the next elections they are nowhere to be seen, and this happened also in the Slovenia, not in Slovenia. In 2015 and 16, as you can see, this chart describes an migrant route, immigration problem in 2015 and 16, route from Asia mostly, or from Southern Europe to Germany and Sweden. This is where the migrants wanted to go, basically. And the route went first to Serbia and Hungary, when Hungary closed the borders and built their wall. The route turned towards the west and went through Slovenia, and those are the pictures that we could observe every day in Slovenia. 1.5 million people just went through Slovenia in basically 6 weeks, which is a huge number, and it had a major impact on the Slovenian political sphere and political system. The guy, professor of law that I was describing before, his government was a failure, of course. They had no political experience whatsoever. So he resigned 3.5 years later in 2018, mostly because of internal coalition disagreements, record low trust. So if you think that trust towards Biden is very low, Miro Hajek had not even 5%. So because of such a non-existent trust, really, he decided to resign, and this resulted in the next early parliamentary elections, and the story just repeated itself. Or again, some new populist political party was established, again 2 months before the elections, again named after somebody who was not in politics before, this time Marjan Šarec, the mayor of one medium-sized Slovenian municipality, and he was not so successful, but still he came second, and he was the one that had the most MPs, members of the parliament, on the left side of political sphere, so he was the next president of the government, and the same happened again, populist rhetorics, again ideas to abolish basically other more traditional political parties. So the story repeated itself, but also this, the next government, the next populist government, again the left wing, was not very successful, and decided to resign just weeks before the COVID-19 pandemic hit Slovenia. So they resigned in early 2020 and expected that we would have another early parliamentary elections. This did not happen because 4 parties, 2 right-wing and 2 left-wing, decided to form this time a right-wing government that was led by another populist figure known Europe-wide. This guy, his name is Janez Janša. He's the leader of the largest right-wing Slovenian party, and this was his 3rd government that he led, and he was leading the government between 2020 to 2022, so during the COVID period, until the regular elections that we had this year in late April 22. He was quite strict as the president of the government. Some described him as not very democratic. We had a number of COVID-related measures in Slovenia. For instance, we could not move outside of our own municipality. If we did, this was usually a fine of 2,000 euro.
I was noticing that name Golub. That also occurs, it's down in Golub PM. Yeah, that name also occurs in Norway. G-O-L-O-B.
I have no idea.
Gets around.
So in 2022, the story repeated itself. Again, new populist actors emerged. This time, the narrative was different, of course. Anti-COVID populists, conspiracy theorists, also because of Ukrainian situation, pro-Russian forces this time. So some political forces that are pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine. And again, newly established populist party, this time movement from freedom from Janša, of course, emerged with the leader that was the CEO of state-owned energy company. His name is Robert Golob. In this translation, this would be Mr. Pigeon. And Mr. Pigeon became the new prime minister, and he won the elections with a record number of MPs, 41 out of 90. So this is almost absolute majority. And he needed only one coalition party to establish his coalition. And these are the results from Slovenian last elections. As you can see, totally new party that was not existing before got almost 35%. That came out of nowhere, basically. That just said, we will provide you with the freedoms. We will not repeat any COVID restrictions from previous government, and this was enough. People voted for the guy, and the other two conspiracy parties or anti-COVID parties called Resnica, so the truth, and this one with a very long name, that were not so successful, did not go over 4%, which is required in Slovenia to get the MPs. And I will, I'm going towards my finish. The guy, the new Slovenian Prime Minister, Mr. Pigeon, went on national TV in July and said this. So this classifies him as the anti-COVID idiot, as I say. So it's totally enough to have sunshine and sea salt water, and you are treated from COVID. So this is not very different from what Mr. Trump said 2 years before. So why did Central and Eastern Europe become a mecca for populism, populist leaders, and for populist parties? There are a couple of reasons, and I listed 6 reasons here. First reason is the historical trauma of non-democratic regimes and pet dependency shared by the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. So there is a fear that things would go back as it were before 1990, in the times where the Soviet Union had the most influence, and those countries would basically reverse their course from democracy back to the authoritarian regimes. The second reason, social and economic situation, which worsened a lot during and after global economic crisis and led towards growing insecurity in the labor market, and the populist leaders promised we would raise wages, we would raise pensions, we would provide for you. This was quite successful strategy. The third, already presented, already mentioned reason is the migrant crisis that the countries of Central and Eastern Europe have been struggling with for several years, and this created a xenophobic, anti-EU, nationalistic, patriotic, as they call themselves, parties, which subsequently found strong popular support. So everybody hates this immigrant, and this is common to our party. So this was the narrative that they built on. Also, what we noticed in Central and Eastern Europe was the decline of the traditional political parties. Those parties suffered an unprecedented decline in support, so almost nobody, or just few percent of voters are still put their trust towards those traditional political parties, while all the alternative political parties attracted increasing number of supporters and also voters. So this could be described as a crisis of traditional political parties and also traditional political institutions, and a major challenge to liberal democracy as we know it. Also, what happened is the fifth reason, the social media that have emerged, increase enormously over the last decade, and so-called charismatic leaders who have penetrated the political space through online tools have now become much more popular. They have direct access to me, to you, through Twitter, through Facebook, through other social media tools, and traditional parties never had that, and they are struggling to do the same. And the sixth reason is the politics of attack, strong language, confrontation, being aggressive. Those strategies have become much more attractive than the politics of collaboration. The emotions now have become more important than facts, and that respect for the elite has been replaced by the anti-elitism. A conclusion: the answer to two questions raised at the beginning. Does populism represent a real challenge to the traditional modes of doing politics and democracy itself in the Central and Eastern European region and our democracies? Yeah, of course. The answer can be just only positive. Initially mostly represented in the newly established political parties that emphasize popular issues, higher ethical standards, distinction from traditional party elites. Populism is now slowly, or not so slowly, expanding also to other more traditional political parties, both on the extreme left and on the extreme right side of the political continuum, destroying more moderate, more liberal centrist political parties and making any form of political cooperation between the two sides much more difficult than maybe 10 or 20 years before. And whether populism could in fact contribute towards the partial reversal of democratic processes in Central and Eastern Europe, we have seen some signs, some measurements that are saying this could be the case, that we are going into this direction as populist parties and politicians are sadly gaining support, public support on one side, and also international measurements measuring democratic stability, democratic consolidation are showing some signs of democratic decline, and some countries like Hungary have already gone over or back to the group of hybrid regimes, are not even considered democracies anymore. So the trends are not very, very positive. So it's hard to be an optimist at this point. And I would like to conclude maybe with positive news. We have just published a new multi-author book in Central Europe, in my political association, in Central and Eastern European Political Association, that is devoted to the rise of the populism in our region, and it just been published a few days ago by Edward Elgar Publishing House in the UK. So if you are interested and you have $80 extra, you can buy this book off the internet and maybe familiarize yourself with this thematic even more. So this would be for me. I don't know if I have overstated my time.
About 15 minutes for some Q&A. Maybe I'll start us off because, populism's not unique to Central Europe. It's Brexit, Le Pen in France, and what's going on in Italy now, obviously the United States. So is there anything that you think is different about the experience of populism and populist politics in Central Europe as opposed to, say, Western Europe more generally, or the United States?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that are different. There is much less political tradition or democratic tradition in Central and Eastern Europe, so there is always fear that things would go back to the way they were before 1990s, before those countries became democracy. There are also more deep and more lingering social and economic issues, so the standard is not similar to the Western or Northern European countries. So everything that influences these standards, like now energy crisis in Europe, would put more fuel towards the populist parties, and it would be easier for them to attract new or just to hold on to the voters they already have. They even don't need to attract new ones because they have a lot already. So there are a couple of different things between the region of Western, Northern Europe and our Central and Eastern European region. Please.
I basically had the same thing, is that when you were showing a list of why Central Europe, why this region in particular, I could only think that everything on there could definitely apply to, as he said, the UK, France, and definitely the US, just in different ways.
Of course.
Our historical background is not of an ex-Soviet state, but it's not as if we didn't participate in the Cold War, as if we don't have historical wounds in this country that were never mended at all.
Yeah. Thanks. Please.
So if we can compare to the United States, where we have two major political parties and nothing else, and then you mentioned in Slovenia there's, creation of political parties that became dominant almost overnight. Do you see this as a possibility here, or can you extrapolate, through even, Western Europe?
I would say yes, but big if. If also media would support this. Because in Slovenia this would not be possible without the role of the traditional media. So also the media, TVs, newspapers, radio stations, social media basically called for the new people to step up and to take over and just reject those incompetent, corrupt, traditional political elites and replace them. So without the role of the media, this would not be possible. If CNN and Fox News are up to it and you can establish a new populist political parties and promote it, then I think everything is possible. But I'm not seeing the same media situation in the United States compared to Central and Eastern Europe. In Central and Eastern Europe, people that work in media are also much more politically active, and they also declare themselves. Maybe in Fox News this is the case, but in all the other media maybe it's not. But in our case, in Slovenia, Hungary, Czech Republic, we basically don't have the media that is not politically biased anymore. And this is important. Yes.
The disappointing thing about this country is that both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party have financial investments in each other. But financially, they are the same party. They keep their separate names because that's what people recognize.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could say something about rule of law principles and whether they're under threat. I mean, obviously they are in Poland and in Hungary. Is that a problem elsewhere in the region now? Is the judiciary being undermined its independence?
Yes, European Commission certainly thinks so. So they are now extending their threats or warnings also towards other Central and European countries. Not only Hungary and Poland are the problem anymore, some other countries are becoming problematic, like Serbia, which is the candidate for the future EU membership. Their policies are rather, I would say, anti-democratic lately, and certainly not in the favor of the rule of law. The Slovenia was on the table during the Janša government. Slovakia was on the table during the case of the famous murdered journalist that the government failed to investigate. Czech Republic is often on the table because of their populist leaders. So yeah, this is not limited only to Poland and Hungary anymore, but also things have changed during the Ukrainian war, because this alliance between the Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic and Slovakia is not as strong as it was.
How much do you view this sort of as like the anti-elitism and distrust is like a two-way street? Because I can't help but think, like, when all this time we're talking about like looking at the populists, like, hey, what's wrong with you? But I think there's a clear distrust and almost disdain by a lot of the elite. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know how big of a factor those play into each other.
Yeah, I agree. If there would be no distrust towards traditional political parties, towards liberal democratic parties, if those parties would play their roles, the opening for the populists would be much narrower, and they would have much more difficult path towards being successful on the national level. So yeah, I agree. The traditional political parties have done their part, and it's not positive. Yeah, please.
What about the Russia-Ukraine war? What has that done to these populism in Eastern Central Europe?
Terrible things. Before,
I came here thinking you'd mention the Russia-Ukrainian war more than you have. You haven't mentioned it at all.
I can mention it. What has changed in Central Eastern Europe after Russia attacked Ukraine is that the alliance between so-called new democracies, I'm calling about Visegrad group countries, namely Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, that was very, very strong before, and this was the alliance towards the EU also, is now changed, is now damaged, because the two of the biggest countries, namely Poland and Hungary, are having much different stance towards the Ukrainian-Russian war. While Poland is embracing EU policies and it's has condemned strongly Russia, Viktor Orban and Hungary has failed to do so. So now Viktor Orban and Hungarian politics is the strongest ally of Russia inside the European Union. They have done some policies of the EU, some economic sanctions towards Russia, but at the same time they are also talking with Russia and still buying oil and still buying gas. So basically negating European Union policies towards Russia. So this coalition of so-called new democracies, it's not strong anymore, and there are clear political cleavages now. So this situation has changed quite dramatically. Yes.
So like when they make some like anti-democracy, is it like all the like ideologies they're promoting, or have they done like certain policies and like legislation that has like limited the like rights, I guess, or like ability for democratic government to take place?
Yes, they have. Those populist movements, when they have taken the government, they have taken the power, they have changed a lot of, let's say, traditional policies. They have made moves towards the rule of law. They have compromised rule of law. They have compromised judiciary, and those things were noticed by the European Union. And there is always tension between Brussels on one side, demanding that they stop with those policies that basically are undermining the democratic development of those countries, and Warsaw or Budapest on the other side. So just 2 days ago, European Commission has said that they would withhold 7.5 billion euro of European funds towards Hungary, if Hungary does not do that and that. So reverse those policies, and most of those policies go against judiciary.
Could you give me some like specific examples? I'm just kind of confused, like specific things that they've done.
They have, for instance, changed the role of the Constitutional Court in Hungary. They have changed the role of academia. In Hungary, now there is only one public university left, because why? They have privatized all the others. And they have privatized it in this way that basically those universities lost their independence, and now they are basically promoting the politics of the ruling party, which is Viktor Orban. And there is only one public university left in Budapest, and even though that one would be privatized, it's just too big for them to swallow. So, but now what they are doing, they are just screwing them with the funding. Without them funding, they get less and less money every year, and they will starve to death. If Viktor Orban is still there in 5 years, there wouldn't be any public university in Hungary left, and Central European University had to flee from Budapest to Vienna, to be very concrete. So we had international good quality university that basically had to escape Hungary, or they would lose their academic freedoms. Basically, they would have to teach the policies and politics influenced by the Orban regime. And this is not academic, really. Yeah.
So I know that you said in your presentation that kind of some of these parties can be really short-winded. What kind of do you see as like the 10-year, in 10 years, what has populism increased in Europe? Has it maintained or maybe gone back?
I think this depends on the traditional political parties. How do they respond to these challenges put in front of them by the populist parties? If they would respond in correct way, let's say, in a persuasive way, if they would be able to win at least part of the trust back from their previous voters, this could be reversible. So I could see that the populist political parties would at least diminish. Maybe not disappear, this would be unrealistic, but become less important in Central and Eastern Europe. But I'm not very optimistic. I think that traditional political parties are trying to compete with the populist parties, using their own strategies and using their own tools. And I don't know if you can beat the populists on their own territory. I'm not too sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of ask a similar question, that we've seen the democratic process like regressing, and I was gonna ask if you see that coming back eventually, like if people were gonna get tired of the populism.
I hope so. I hope they do, and everybody would like to see democracy coming back and democracy strengthening again, but we will see. I'm not very optimistic. Yes.
Obviously, these parties are really popular. How does the general public feel in those countries about kind of like this reversal of democratic processes? I know that they support some of the social policies of the parties, but is there kind of worry in those countries as well?
Okay. Let's take, for example, Hungary. You have two groups of voters in Hungary. Groups of voters in urban centers, like in Budapest. They are very unhappy with Viktor Orban and the ruling Fidesz party, and you have political protests that are going on already for 15 years and are quite often there. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people protesting against Viktor Orban, but he is not winning in Budapest. He knows that. He needs to win outside of Budapest, so he needs to win over rural voters, and what he is doing is he's promising populist ideas, proposing populist policies. For instance, if you have a second child, third child, fourth child, you are getting bonuses for every additional child. So people are being basically bought with additional social policies, social money. He has raised pensions, he has raised wages. During the COVID, people have received vouchers for energy, vouchers for food. So with this, these are only a couple of tens of euro or 100 euro. It's not a big sums, but to the people living in the rural areas, this meant enough to support Viktor Orban yet again, and he also won the latest elections. He's losing Budapest and bigger cities like in US. Democratic Party is winning urban centers, but there are more people in the rural areas, sadly.
Thank you.
So we have time for one more question, bro. Okay. This way. No, it's gotta go.
Yeah, please.
I was just gonna, well, since you said that, now I'm almost forgetting. Oh, yes. I hate to keep bringing it back to the U.S. because, obviously that's not your expertise, but it's mine, pretty much everybody else's. But again, with, as you're saying, giving out support subsidies to these rural areas, increasing pensions, direct financial aid pretty much, but not social programs, defunding public universities. Oh, there's only one still remaining, as you said.
Yeah.
It makes me think of COVID. It makes me think of the stimulus checks that went out. And of course, Donald Trump, happy to give out these stimulus checks, but a social program, my goodness, no, that's insane. We need to pull back on those, but still give these smaller and easier, like, to understand. When you never have to pay for healthcare in your life, you don't think about it, but if you just get money, it's, oh, I just got money. That's just a thing that I was given. It's easier to understand and, like, think, oh yes, this person helped me, this person directly benefited me, rather than a much more abstract social program that helps, that actually helps people.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm afraid our time is up. Before I thank our guest, let me remind you, we are back again next week with our series on the midterm elections. We have Francis Lee from Princeton University talking about insecure majorities and how that changes the dynamics of our elections and also how Congress operates. But join me now in thanking Miro Hajek for a really interesting conversation.